And welcome everybody to the Volunteer Day at the Iowa Day at the Capitol webinar training. We're excited to see everybody here. And as an icebreaker, while we wait for a few more people to join, could you please just share in the chat, if you have access to it, your name, the organization that you're joining from, or your program if you're an AmeriCorps or a grantee, and how many days at the Capitol have you participated in? If it's your first time, let us know. And if you're a veteran, that's also great to hear too. We have a commissioner, his first day at the Capitol. Thank you guys for sharing. I did want to mention this is the general webinar training for all of our programs. We do have a separate one for AmeriCorps. AmeriCorps people, you're totally welcome at this one, but I just wanted to let you know there will be a little bit more of a tailored presentation for you on Friday at noon. So if you're coming to both, you'll be extra prepared. Okay, so and if you're just joining us, just as you can, share in the chat your name, your organization, how many of these you have participated in. If it's your first time, we'd love to hear about that. And we're going to go ahead and get started. So I'm Rebecca Gurnis, I'm the Volunteer Promotions Coordinator, and I'll just kind of be walking us through the agenda today and introducing our speakers. So the first thing, again, just share your experience with the Volunteer Iowa Day at the Capitol in the chat. We're going to go over just a brief overview of the event, frequently asked questions for every year, why and how we ask you to participate. That's going to be covered by Angela Jiskut, who is our commission chair. Then Kevin Kester, who is also part of our commission and a former Iowa State representative, will be talking about tips to connect with your legislators, start building relationships with legislators, and what is really effective practices for that. And then finally, we're going to go over our policy priorities for the 2023 session and leave some time for questions at the end. We'll also be hearing from Adam Lounsbury, our executive director. He's going to be talking about the policy portion, along with Jamie Orozco-Nagel. They'll be kind of splitting duties for talking about the policy and general priorities for Volunteer Iowa this year. So I'm going to pass it on to Angela to get us started.
Thanks so much, Rebecca, and good afternoon, everybody. As Rebecca mentioned, I'm Angela Jiskut, and I am the commission chair for Volunteer Iowa. I am presenting today from West Des Moines, waiting for our impending snow to come and hoping maybe that it doesn't. But speaking of snow, we're usually pretty familiar with that for our day at the Capitol, since we do it in February. And whether it snows or not, the nice thing is we have ways for you to attend. So diving into a little bit of the overview for the day at the Capitol. From our day at the Capitol, what it is, hopefully all of you don't, but if you don't and you're a first-time participant, we're so glad that you're here today to learn a little bit about it. Our day at the Capitol includes that our participants, which is hopefully everyone on this call, will meet in person or virtually with our legislators to educate and engage them with the mission and policy initiatives of Volunteer Iowa. And when we think of that, I think it's important to identify and understand, what does Volunteer Iowa do? So really what we want to be able to communicate is that Volunteer Iowa provides a wide range of programming, funding, and training related to service and volunteerism that has an impact across the entire state of Iowa. Oftentimes, our role is behind the scenes, and funders may not understand how the programs they see in their communities are actually supported by our work. And speaking of our impact across the entire state, by me just looking in the chat, I see that we have people from across the state participating in our call today, which is why it's so important for you to engage at our day at the Capitol. because it gives the opportunity for everybody across the state of Iowa to be represented, have a say, and to advocate for the very, very important work that we're doing. So as we think about our why points, it's really important for our day at the Capitol that we highlight the importance of service and volunteering in Iowa. Both of those things are so critical, and I think everyone on the call would agree that we've seen the importance and how critical it is rise to the top after the pandemic, as our service and our volunteering percentages have actually dropped. So it's even more important today that we are advocating and having these conversations about how impactful service and volunteering is in Iowa and in our communities across the state. It's also very important to build legislators' awareness of policy issues that are important for expanding in our sector of what we do. And we also want to provide a venue for Volunteer Iowa programs to be able to connect with their local legislatures, which is an awesome outcome of the day at the Capitol. So we, Volunteer Iowa, like many other organizations, host a day at the Capitol on an annual basis as a way to build awareness with our legislators and to really advocate for the conversations that need to be had from a programming, a funding, and a support perspective. Hosting this day helps us provide a unified message to legislators while also allowing participants to be able to share their unique contributions and also share stories locally from your community and what you might be seeing in your organization. We want to attract attention to our Iowa nonprofits and volunteer programs to help legislators understand what's being accomplished by volunteers and the critical services that could actually be lost without assistance from the dedicated volunteers. So let's transition to the next slide of a little bit of the details, the when and the who of Day at the Capitol. I think it's really important for me to share and to emphasize that participation is not limited to this one day, especially with the opportunity that we have to connect virtually. There's always an option to follow up afterwards, to continue the conversation with your legislators, to call, to email, to advocate throughout the year. So the important details are, when is this happening? It's happening on February 2, which is coming up very soon. It's very convenient. It's over the lunch hour, so it's from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. And there will be a Volunteer Iowa table in the South Rotunda. That's where you'll be able to find us. And your meetings with legislators that you can take action on setting up can take place throughout the day as it's convenient for you and your elected officials of what works in both of your schedules. Again, if you're not able to attend in person, you can schedule a phone call or a virtual meeting, which by this point we're all very, very used to, and it's very accommodating for schedules. This is only one contact in the relationship building with your legislator, and that's the key point, that participation is not limited to this one day, as you continue to build that relationship with your legislator and make it an ongoing, continuing conversation throughout the year. As far as who should participate, we encourage any staff member, participant, or supporter of your program and organization who can speak to the value of Volunteer Iowa and what it does for your program and your organization. If you haven't registered yet, we're going to put the registration link in the chat. I know I just registered. I had it on my calendar, but wanted to make sure I was in the system. That's important so the Volunteer Iowa staff can also plan for who is going to be attending. So please register. It's really simple. It took me about 30 seconds. So encourage you to do that today. Don't delay on that. And then start reaching out after we have this webinar today so that you can get in contact with your legislators and get that conversation starting already now. I know that's on my list of things to do this week, and I am committing to do that as being a participant at the Day at the Capitol. So on the next slide, we're going to talk about why you want to take part at the Day at the Capitol. The top point that you guys are going to see bolded here is, if you don't share your priorities with legislators, who will? I'm sure Kevin can speak to this as well with his role in the legislature, but it's so important that legislators hear from us, the people that live across the state of Iowa, the people that are engaged in investing in our communities, because we need to share what we're seeing, what's happening, and what our needs are. Advocacy is one of the most important methods for organizations to help achieve results. And when you think about who are those key stakeholders, I'm hoping that legislators are at the top of the list for you, which is why it's such a great opportunity to come and attend the Day at the Capitol and make sure some of your team members are there as well. Legislators need to understand your organization as well as your issues, your clients, your customers, your stakeholders, who you interact with, so that they can also make good policy decisions. If not, and they don't have the information, they're isolated in a vacuum to make those decisions. So let's make sure that we stand up and have inputs to those conversations so that they can make policy decisions that support your organization. I also think it's important to touch on some perceived barriers to engagement with policymakers. I know that I've been there before, and by educating myself and participating in the day at the Capitol, it's really helped break down those barriers and remind myself that legislators are normal people just like me. We all put our pants on the same way in the morning, and I love that they are taking action to represent us as Iowans and have taken that step to take that civic duty, and they truly want to hear from us. So some of the perceived barriers can be, from all of our perspective, confusion or fear of laws. Maybe we feel that we're not educated and we don't know. And again, that's why it's so great to ask questions. Google's a great tool for that. Ask the Volunteer Iowa staff, because we want to support you on that. There can also be a perceived barrier of lack of board and leadership support, potentially from your organization. But again, the first step of getting past that is taking the step to participate in the day of the Capitol, as well as asking those in your organization to participate with you to break down those barriers. You also may have a barrier of lack of staff time and expertise. That's a very common barrier. And again, my encouragement and the Volunteer Iowa staff's encouragement to you would be, this is the best investment of your time. It doesn't even need to be for the full day, but take that time, and I promise that you're going to see benefits reaped from the time that you invest. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jamie.
Thanks, Angela. So I'm just going to cover a little bit more detailed information about our tips and suggestions for your participation. Don't worry, we have a toolkit that outlines all of these steps, and we'll be sending that out after the call. It'll get into more detail about these suggestions for how to participate in the day, as well as our other resources. So we know that legislators are very busy during session, so it's going to be sometimes challenging to connect with them if you don't reach out in advance. Their availability can vary depending on the day and the committees that they're on and what that schedule looks like. And I think there's also some difference depending on what other groups are at the Capitol and who's trying to meet with them. Where you're coming from, I think the local legislators get a few more requests than the farther away legislators, just because it's easier for local people to come. So really encourage you to reach out in advance. We have the link where you can look up your legislators if you don't know that and find their contact information. And encourage you to set something up. Again, that way you'll find out if they're going to be out that day or busy that day. You can work to find a mutually convenient time. We will, as I said, send you our talking points, so appreciate you taking a chance to look at those. We'll be covering some of those specifics in more detail at the end of today's call, if you can stick with us through that time. We think that, once you have that meeting, it's also, we'll probably beat the drum on this, important to follow up afterwards, because that's not the end of your engagement with your legislators. So thinking about thanking them, and is there a way that you can connect with them and invite them to an event, or celebrate your participation, taking a photo with them and publishing that, tagging them back so they're getting some recognition also for meeting with you. A new opportunity that we don't have highlighted on this slide, but I also want to mention for this year, is the opportunity to request your own table to highlight your program or organization. So follow up with an email to us if that's something that you would like to have available, and table at the event alongside Volunteer Iowa and our RSVP directors and some of our other national service and volunteer partners. And then we just want to talk a little bit more, because we have folks on the call who sometimes have some restrictions about the type of engagement they can do with legislators. We can go to the next slide. Just understanding your role and how you can participate. So everyone can come to the Capitol, can meet with legislators, can educate them about your programs, about the service activities that you're doing if you're a national service member. And many people can engage in lobbying, but not everybody. So it's just important to know, first of all, kind of your internal status at your organization. Are you a national service member? If you're coming on national service time, AmeriCorps Senior Corps, there's a prohibition on doing any lobbying as an official AmeriCorps member. So that's important to know. Then getting into who else can lobby, you need to know maybe how is your position funded, because if you're funded out of some of those federal funds that fund a lot of our programs and you're coming on your official staff time, then you may have some restrictions on lobbying. And then some organizations may have their own internal policies about, who should engage in that. So make sure, you check in with your supervisor, make sure that you're clear on what's allowable in terms of your role. But lots of people can engage in lobbying. People who are alums, so who participated in your program, certain staff members, board members, and other partners and supporters of your program. Okay, we talked about who can lobby and who can't, but maybe we should just clarify what is educating versus lobbying. So all of these could be forms of advocacy, which can be kind of a general term, but educating is when you're communicating the issues. So you could say, I'm an AmeriCorps member. When I served with the Iowa Legal Aid AmeriCorps program in Mason City, and I served a whole region in North Central Iowa. We were helping people who couldn't afford civil legal representation. So sharing, giving some details about your service and the impact you're having. Lobbying is when you're giving that background information, but then you're making a specific request. So when you're saying, I serve with Iowa Legal Aid, and we really depend on, this appropriation from the state legislature to help cover our services. Please support, funding for Iowa Legal Aid. That's when you're making an ask, and that's when you're engaging in lobbying. So again, making sure you know those rules. The IRS rules limit nonprofit lobbying, but that's really just to prevent nonprofits from saying that they're a nonprofit. But really only engaging in lobbying. There's not a ban on lobbying for nonprofits. So again, a lot of you may be able to do that. It's just knowing what the rules are, what the difference is, and feeling comfortable that you're participating in a way that is allowable. Educating is still very important. So know that that's still a meaningful way to participate in our day. And I think just be prepared. If a legislator would say, well, what is your ask? Be prepared for that. Is there someone in your group who can answer that question if you can't individually? Or is there a way that you can refer them maybe to say, I can't make a specific ask, but I can share more information or get you connected with someone else at your organization who can follow up with them and provide that answer. So those are some general background information on connecting with legislators, but we have an expert here who, Representative Kester, who was a legislator for quite a while and served with our commission while he was a legislator. So I'm going to turn it over to him to give the expert tips on connecting with legislators.
Good afternoon. My name's Kevin. Thank you, Jamie. The first thing I wanted to share in terms of the slide 9 is not just an intro, but smile. It's one of the ways that you make yourself more comfortable, the little nerves at first, but also the legislator or group that you're going to speak to. Another common and helpful piece of introduction is that you bring a sidekick, a partner in your great efforts that particularly, as I noticed, there's a lot of representation from AmeriCorps. You don't lobby, but it is possible that a lobby-related question that might come up, you can answer, or the other person with you could. Brief is the first bold word in the slide that I'm to touch upon. The reason that's important is that there are, on average, over 1,000 bills introduced in every session, and no legislator can be an expert on all of them. They don't all come up for a vote. And unless they do, there's less rigor in the study, the prep, in what's going on with a particular bill, unless you ask, in particular if the you is a constituent. So that's the other part of the introduction. Please make sure they know your hometown, what county you're from. They certainly know their counties. And whether you live in their area and are a constituent, can vote for them, or whether you work in the area, that's almost as good. And it of course matters. So don't neglect that. Regarding the opening, I would like to suggest that you prepare what you're going to ask for. We just covered that on the notion of you might be asked, what are you asking for? If you start with that, both ears are tuned into that as you speak. And that is practical. And it's also it is something you can do briefly. When you visit with a legislator, the slide says, consider yourself to be a consultant, an expert, a person with insights on this area. I tried to touch on why that matters when there's 1,000+ bills rolling around on that desk over the period of a session. That matters. The other is that it helps you be more specific about asking them the specifics about your program. Asking questions is a better way to get interaction than just talking the whole 3 or 5 minutes that you might spend with them. You should know this, I'm sure, but the next piece is that they work for you. They work for you. Next slide, please. I see I can't take control of that. So as you reach out to key strategies, one of those is your advanced email. That's been touched on already. Please contact them in advance. Send an email that's particularly read by the clerk. They have a secretary or a clerk sitting beside them during the session. They're a part-time employee that is only an employee during the session, but boy, they're key. And so your response might come from them. And if your legislator's unavailable, ask for them. Ask for the clerk to speak with that person. It is quite possible that they have a conflict. There are many things that happen over the lunch hour. Leave with the legislator right up front. If you hand them your program brochure, I view that as a distraction, because I want to be making eye contact with you if I'm your legislator, and not studying your brochure or your other handouts, but you should have something to hand out at the end. There's a good representation from AmeriCorps. I noticed that there are RSVP foster grandparent participants too. I think you have a special entree to make sure they better understand what your program is. So just I want to emphasize that point. But you set up in advance your appointment, your visit, and what your main emphasis will be. That's best done in an email. Next slide, please. There's a quick sample report. It's called After Action, and it gives briefings. You don't have to memorize this slide. It'll be in the link that's provided for you to touch upon easy recall of the important things that you touched upon. That link is in the toolkit. You can see in advance, or you can fill that out later, but it's important data for the record of how this all worked. Next slide, please. So, continued engagement. I've heard that word 4 times already. It's a beautiful word. And an engaging visit is one where there were some questions, there is some interaction, and that role is on you more than on the legislator. Most of the time, they will stand and listen the entire time, unless you direct a question that they should answer, like, can you support this? Are you aware of this? Will you allow me to take a picture with my cell phone with you and post that on my social media. Social media will come up more and later, but the idea of a follow-up email, ask that legislator or that clerk to connect you to their social media, and likewise ask them to follow you, your organization. You might even ask, when's your next forum? That's a typical thing that's held in a coffee shop, or maybe the Chamber of Commerce is sponsoring one and they know what the date is that's coming up next month, or they got to get back to you. Because one of my favorite answers as a legislator when I would listen to a presentation is if the presenter said, I don't know. It's very honest. It's not embarrassing. It's honest. And it's common. And so if they ask a specific and you don't know the answer, boy, is that a setup. That is a perfect way to give you an entree to do further engagement and send them an answer when you find out. And that should be relatively soon, but it doesn't need to be tomorrow. And so that's another important way to engage. I would encourage you to do engagement on an almost weekly basis in some fashion and follow up on things like, are you aware of our service day? Have you or your staff been able to, their staff, it's one clerk, part-time, very important person, but have you scheduled a visit? Can you tell us when you might visit our program when you're back home and have some time? So with that, remember, they work for you. It's not the other way around. Relax, smile, and enjoy the interaction. Then they will. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Kevin. All right, before we transition to our policy side, we just wanted to highlight some information from our legislative day last year, where we had, see if my animations will work. About 240 unique contacts, and that's just from the people that filled out our after action report. So this is another plug for that. Please, if you take part in this event, let us know how it went and let us know who you reached, because that is really important information for us in terms of understanding our reach and how we can make this day work better in the future. We had a number of people that both emailed, set up in-person meetings, and called legislators and different legislators. So their senators and their state representatives, members of a certain committee that they're interested in working on, as well as the ones that represent their district. And of those people that responded to our survey, over 85% said that they had plans for continued engagement. So we really want to stress that this is just the introduction to what we hope is a relationship with your legislator, and that you feel comfortable reaching out over and over again. As Kevin said, almost weekly would be an ideal, but just anything that we can think of to involve them in our work is just really amazing. So we also have some positive things. So these are all from first time. These are testimonials from last year. From first time people that had never participated in a day before, really enjoyed the time, learned a lot more about civic government and civic engagement, and then felt much more comfortable doing that going forward. And so we just wanted to share, this is about breaking the ice. We hope that you guys can enjoy this day. It's not just something that we want to feel like a chore for you, but it's just something that really will open up your engagement with your legislators. With that, I'm going to move on to Adam, who is going to share more about the highlights of Volunteer Iowa over the past year before we go into the policy priorities.
Thanks, Rebecca. So first off, you will get a handout like this, and it's going to be a little bit different because some things are changing as we're speaking, but in general, we just wanted to make sure you were armed with some stats and some things about all of the different areas that we work. And so regardless of what kind of program or where you come from, you can at least highlight some of those things that shows the impact of the work that Volunteer Iowa and our programs and partners are providing in their communities. So yeah, I encourage you to highlight a few of those. And like I said, you'll have a one-pager. Also, I do think it's, and we're going to draw this out a little bit more in the actual handout, but you know, it says in 2021, 41.8% of Iowans volunteered regularly despite the COVID-19 pandemic. So that is great, you know, that only that with 42%, but that is a drop, you know, from 2019 to 2021, you know, we went from over 50% volunteering in Iowa of our people volunteering regularly to 41.8. So, and that represents literally, you know, tens of millions of dollars of services lost to communities, to nonprofits, to organizations. And we know that for a fact because like the state had to put National Guard and AmeriCorps and everything else just in food delivery, and you know spent literally you know over $10 million just in that area to replace the volunteers that were doing food packaging, handing out food, you know, working in food pantries, things like that. So that alone during the pandemic and just during the heat of the pandemic cost the state millions of dollars. So we know that, you know, that the value and the lost labor is huge, and the work continues, and it's, if anything, it's gone up and continues to go up. So you know, we volunteering is a learned behavior, and you know, any behavior change, you know, needs to continue to be reinforced and bring people back into the fold. So now more than ever, this work is important, and we need is so, you know, stressing those things, and we'll call that out a little bit, flush that out in the actual talking points as well. But just wanted to highlight that a little bit. Also, another thing that came out just a couple days ago, so the governor's state of the state, you know, we are looking at, you know, there's some proposals about realignment, and so you might get some questions about that, how that would affect you guys. And so there is a proposal, the governor's proposing moving Volunteer Iowa to be part of the new Department of Health and Human Services. So just that, to throw that out there, you know, we'll be sending some messaging out in general to our programs about that, but we don't anticipate that would affect any of our programs, any of our work at all. And it'd be, if anything, a positive way to connect to a lot of the things we're doing. However, you know, there's a lot of pieces moving, a lot of bills, and Kevin can attest, when a lot of change happens, things can get lost. So it just makes it more important that we're kind of stressing and really stressing the importance, because different committees are going to be looking at different appropriations now that haven't seen it before. So it's more important that they are familiarized with the work you do and how it connects to some of these monies that go out there.
Right, thanks. And then to lead us off into the policy priority discussion, we'll go back to Angela to kind of give an overview of where we are in prioritizing our policies.
Thanks, Rebecca, and thanks, Adam. So as Rebecca just did the lead in, I'm going to share a little bit about Volunteer Iowa's policy priorities. And we have drafted the following principles that guide our public policy work. And then from these, we actually develop a yearly agenda of policy goals. So we advocate for policies that build the culture and climate for service in Iowa. Hoping you've heard that re-emphasized in our call today. Support the infrastructure needed for quality service opportunities and programs. Develop new service opportunities to meet critical community needs. Improve and streamline existing service opportunities and programs. And the last one, expand Iowa's existing volunteer base, which again, as I mentioned previously, is extremely critical right now, knowing that our volunteer percentages have dropped since pre-pandemic. Now is the time to re-engage Iowans across the state in service and volunteering again. And now I'm going to turn it back over to the Volunteer Iowa staff, who are going to give some detailed information about our 2023 priorities and requests.
Thanks, Angela. And we're going to go through some priorities in kind of 4 key programmatic or issue areas. So the first one is AmeriCorps Seniors. So Volunteer Iowa is responsible for administering state funding that is provided to the RSVP branch of AmeriCorps Seniors. So at this time, there are not specific state appropriations for the other Senior Corps branches, but we do hope that all our programs can help support this legislative priority. And Adam's going to explain it in a little bit more detail.
Yep. So basically, we're you know, this is a status quo ask, and we just want to make sure that, especially now, our 55 plus volunteers is the demographic, as you would imagine, with the pandemic that decreased the most. Strangely enough, it's actually 55 to 70. 80-year-olds volunteer only dropped 1% for some reason. I don't know why. It's a little quirk in the data, but but if you're between those numbers, that number saw a really big drop. And so the places that we didn't see as much of a drop were and are continuing to be engaged in different ways as places where we had our, in the counties that we have covered with RSVP, and just demonstrating the importance of that volunteer infrastructure and engagement. It's also, we saw a direct correlation in the places where we didn't have to support as many food banks and things like that. So during the pandemic, because they figured out creative ways to volunteer safely during the pandemic and continue some of that work. So it's important now more than ever. We're talking with aging on how we can continue to expand our work, because now it's so important in this field. So we want to make sure we continue to provide that base level support to grow this programming.
And just a reminder, as we were talking earlier about the educating versus lobbying distinction. So for these situations and these priorities moving forward, the impact is the educating piece that everybody can share, but the priority would typically be the ask that only those who are allowed to lobby could make that.
Well, if you can't, a lot of times AmeriCorps members or other folks that can't lobby, they'll bring, say, hey, to a commissioner or someone else that, they'll tag along with you so they can help make that pitch as well.
All right, next we're going to share about our AmeriCorps programs. So Volunteer Iowa administers the state funding, the AmeriCorps state grants. So we award and oversee those. We also are glad to have our own AmeriCorps Vista program that serves as an intermediary around the state. And then here in Iowa, we house one of only 4 AmeriCorps and CCC campuses that are around the country. So we have a pretty significant AmeriCorps presence and different engagement that we have with our our AmeriCorps programs around the state. So there's a few different priorities, some that would be of a benefit to all AmeriCorps members who would serve in Iowa, and then some related to some state appropriations for certain program areas. And Adam, did you want to say anything more about that, or?
Sure. Again, especially on those, with the AmeriCorps tax benefits, the general line, and I think legislators have generally agreed that we don't think that people should be taxed for serving. So Iowa was the first state to remove the tax on the education award, and initially wanted to do both at the same time. And so this is finishing that bill and removing it on the living allowance as well. So there isn't current legislation being proposed, but it is something that we're as they're looking at taxes and tax reforms, that this is something that's discussed and part of the conversation. And it's been a priority for the commission's brought up for several years and continue to kind of beat that drum. So the other two are very relevant right now with the pandemic, and just with influx with we have an increased refugee population with Afghanistan refugees and others that have come into Iowa, and just helping integrate that into communities and making sure that we have support to do that. So supporting restoring that back to a pre-cut level on that side, and then also just figuring out, we know that reading and math and scores have declined with the pandemic and changes in learning environment. We also know that the most effective intervention is increased tutoring, and of tutoring programs, Reading Corps is the most effective, cost-effective, and effective tutoring intervention that's out there. It's got proven data. It works well. We need more of it. We need it in more counties, and especially right now. So as we're looking at getting kids back on track, getting them caught up to pre-pandemic levels in education, at least on the Reading Corps side, and we're talking with United Ways of Iowa and others and our partners there, just to say how and this is something the governor wants to do, is to look at how we can build that out to a math core as well.
So next is the Iowa Mentor or Iowa Mentoring Partnership. So Volunteer Iowa houses Iowa Mentor, which is a program that supports certification or other education and best practices for youth serving programs. And here we also coordinate the Future Ready Iowa virtual mentoring program and have a couple of priorities related to those.
Yep. So again, on the youth mentoring side, currently the Department of Public Health and which is fully merging with the Department of Human Services as well, supports over $800,000 in youth mentoring grants in their prevention or youth development, youth mentoring grants to certified mentoring programs. We, obviously want to see that continue, and it's a great way to strengthen both our mentoring sector and our prevention efforts in Iowa. And, so continuing just to advocate for the continued support, and then on the Future Ready Iowa side as well. So it's on the college and ensuring success of our student success and career mentoring work moving forward as we grow that program. And it also, that funding also supports some of our AmeriCorps work on the College Aid AmeriCorps program that provides some of the backbone to that Future Ready Iowa mentoring program.
All right, and last but not least, Volunteer Iowa does a broad range of work to support community volunteerism. Things like the Volunteer Generation Fund grants, which help support local volunteer centers, our Service Enterprise program, which helps to engage best practices in volunteer management in nonprofit organizations or public entities. And then we do award ceremonies like the Governor's Volunteer Awards, the Volunteer Hall of Fame. So a lot of things that help just with that community volunteer effort. So we are able to do some of that because of some general appropriations from the state legislature for our operating expenses.
So yeah, in short, our programs, we either grant or leverage private dollars over $20 million and receive fairly minimal support from the state. Last year it was $48 to 1. It was the leverage, for every dollar the state legislature puts up, we leverage $48 in funding, and that doesn't include the literally hundreds of millions of dollars of volunteer labor that's leveraged from that. So it's important. Costs go up, and costs are going up with inflation and everything else, and so just making sure that we continue to relieve that base level support for Volunteer Iowa and its work, and mainly from especially with all of these changes with realignment and moving that maintains that people understand the importance of that backbone support. Because at the end of the day, if when costs get squeezed and the costs don't come up, they get past the programs, and so that often affects you guys and affects your bottom line and your ability to work as well. So we definitely want to make sure that support, they understand the importance of that support and how it impacts your work and your communities.
All right. Well, that was the content that we wanted to share. So thanks for coming. We do think your participation here helps you be better prepared to engage in the day. Watch for the email to come from Rebecca with our toolkit, a link to those resources and other things. We are also happy to stay on for a few minutes if there's any questions that folks have. Otherwise, thanks for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing those of you who can join us in person on February 2nd.
Thanks, everyone. I don't know if AJ is raising his hand or if he's just.
Yeah, I was.
Go for it.
Just a quick question. Is it possible or allowable, I guess, to get legislative scorecards, if you will, for our local elected officials for how much support they have given in the past, so we can thank them for prior support or encourage them to support more?
We have not historically done that. But you know, and I will say that we have historically, this hasn't, I mean, support for service and volunteerism is it's usually an all or none proposition. And Kevin can probably remember better than I can, but there's only been a couple no votes when our bills have been moving through. So generally, and I don't think they were from Shenandoah. So, but yes, but you know, I think certain people have different, and so have more important, you know, what we'll do is we'll have committees, and you know, what committees legislators are on, and highlight some of those that are really important. And we might pull you out and say, hey, we're gonna we want to do a visit with these guys. Can we tag along with yours as well, or do a separate meeting with some of those key legislators that are really important because they're sitting on the right committees.
Okay. Thank you.
AJ, I'd just like to add that you can just thank them for their past support, because it's been bipartisan and nearly unanimous, if not unanimous, year over year. And so thank them. Even if they voted no, their reason may have been very personal. And the point is, the legislature supported it year after year. There has not been legislative cut to our programming or to respect for volunteers in Iowa.
Great, thank you.
See any more questions? Thank you, everyone, and look forward to seeing you in February.
Thanks.
So, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.